Elon Musk was ready to talk about rockets and AI until a little girl asked him why her sick brother still goes to bed hungry, and the internet hasn't stopped talking since. The energy in the convention center was electric. You could feel it in the air, not excitement exactly, but curiosity. People had flown in from all over the country to hear Elon Musk speak at the Future of Tech Summit in Austin, Texas. Rows of journalists lined the walls, while engineers, students, and entrepreneurs filled every seat. Phones were up, live streams running. Elon stood on stage, arms folded, slightly bouncing on his heels the way he does when he's half distracted and half thinking 10 moves ahead. He'd just wrapped up a talk about Mars colonization and next-gen robotics. Now it was time for audience questions. He pointed casually at a microphone near the left aisle. "Let's go there," he said. A slight murmur passed through the crowd as a tiny figure stepped forward. You wouldn't have noticed her at first. Not in that sea of adults wearing lanyards and blazers. She was maybe 8 years old, dressed in jeans that looked slightly too short and a faded t-shirt that said, "Big Sister," in glittery letters. She had a spiral-bound notebook tucked tightly under one arm. The moderator leaned down and asked her name. She whispered something he couldn't catch. He smiled and adjusted the mic. And then she spoke. "If you're so smart," she said, "and you can build rockets and robots, how come you can't fix the world so kids like my brother do not go hungry?" The room stilled, dead quiet. Someone dropped a pen 2 rows back. No one laughed. No one even shifted in their seat. The question landed like a gut punch. She didn't flinch. She stood there, blinking fast like she was trying not to cry, but her voice didn't shake. Not even a little. Elon froze. You could see something in his face change. For a second, he opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked down, then back at her. He wasn't thinking about PR or algorithms or quarterly reports. He was just stuck. He ran a hand across his jaw and exhaled through his nose, trying to find words that wouldn't sound like excuses. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Samira," she said. "And your brother?" "Luis," she replied. "He's sick. My mom skips meals so he can eat. Sometimes we go to church pantries, but they run out." More silence. This time heavier. It wasn't just what she said. It was the timing, the rawness, the fact that it came from someone so small in a room filled with giants. A few people in the audience looked uncomfortable. Some lowered their phones. A tech investor 2 seats from the front rubbed his temples. This wasn't the kind of visionary Q&A they expected. Elon finally took a breath. "That's a very fair question," he said, "and honestly, I don't know if I have a good answer." It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't polished, but it was real. He looked at her again and said, "Sometimes we get so caught up building the future we forget the present is still broken." You could hear a woman quietly crying in the back. Samira just nodded, clutching her notebook tighter. He stepped down from the stage and walked over to her. He crouched to her level and asked, "Can I keep your question? I think I need to sit with it for a while." She nodded again. Then he stood back up, returned to the mic and said, "I think we'll stop questions here. That's the one I needed to hear today." But what no one knew then, what even Elon didn't realize in that moment, was how far that one question would travel. Samira Navarro didn't live in a house with a white picket fence or even a stable roof. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of Bakersfield, California, a part of town where rent was still technically affordable, if your standards were low enough. Cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, neighbors who kept to themselves not because they were rude, but because they were tired. Her mom, Clarabelle, worked nights at the local nursing home. Not as a nurse, she cleaned the floors and wiped down the walls after patients were discharged. During the day, she picked up extra hours at a dollar-plus store 2 blocks from their building. She'd walk, pushing Luis in a beat-up stroller that tilted slightly to the right because one wheel had locked up. Luis was 7, just a year younger than Samira. He had a rare metabolic disorder that made food digestion a nightmare. Certain ingredients sent him into painful bloating, nausea, even seizures. He had dietary needs the local food banks couldn't cater to. Rice, beans, peanut butter, all cheap, all useless to him. His doctors recommended fresh greens, lean protein, very specific supplements. Their insurance barely covered basics. Clarabelle had learned to smile politely when people offered help, then cry in the bathroom after they left. Samira knew more than an 8-year-old should. She knew how to stretch a bag of carrots. She knew when to stay quiet during rent calls. She knew how to distract Luis when his stomach hurt by reading to him out loud from her notebook. Not fairy tales, though. She wrote her own. Stories about a girl who flew a ship made of banana peels across a sky full of jellyfish. A brother who turned his sickness into a superpower. A world where no one ever had to choose between eating and breathing. Clarabelle kept a folder of those stories under her mattress. She said one day they'd publish them. "You're going to be somebody," she told Samira every chance she got. "Don't let this mess tell you otherwise." The day of the tech summit, Samira hadn't planned on speaking. Clarabelle had managed to get free tickets through a nonprofit literacy group. She thought Elon Musk would say something cool about cars or aliens, maybe give away a free laptop. Samira was mostly excited to leave Bakersfield for the first time in her life. They drove all night in a borrowed Toyota Camry that reeked of gas station coffee. Clarabelle packed boiled eggs, apple slices, and half a loaf of bread. She sang along to Spanish pop songs on the radio while Luis napped with his head in Samira's lap. The morning of the event, they arrived early and parked in a lot 3 blocks from the center. Clarabelle braided Samira's hair while they sat on a bench, humming softly. Then she pressed the glittery big sister shirt over her daughter's head and wiped her cheeks with the corner of a napkin. Inside the convention hall, Samira listened. She didn't understand all of it. Quantum chips, reusable rockets. But one word kept repeating: future. Everyone in that room was obsessed with the future. But what about the now? What about kids like Luis, who might not make it to that fancy future if the present kept stealing their chance? So when the moderator asked if anyone else had a question, Samira didn't raise her hand. She stood up and walked straight to the microphone. Her legs shook. Her hands were damp. She gripped her notebook like it was armor. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't think about being on camera. She looked only at Elon. Not because he was rich, not because he was famous, but because, for once, someone who built everything was right there, and she needed someone to hear her. But the moment she stepped away from that microphone, she had no idea her voice would echo far beyond that room. Elon Musk had been asked 1,000 questions in his life, about Mars, Tesla stock, AI ethics, even the price of eggs. But none of them hit like this one. Not a journalist, not a CEO, not a tech rival, just a kid, maybe 4 feet tall, asking why her brother had to suffer when the world was full of people building spaceships. He stayed quiet for longer than most people were comfortable with. In that moment, something happened in the room. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, as if everyone suddenly remembered they were human again, not just minds in suits. Even Elon seemed different. Not smaller, not less important, just exposed. A cameraman later described it as the first time he'd seen Elon Musk not in control. Standing on that stage, Elon tried to push through his usual instincts. Rationalize, explain, redirect, but nothing fit. He looked out at the rows of expectant faces, some sympathetic, some critical, all waiting. "I think," he began, pausing, "I think I've spent a lot of time solving problems I thought were the most urgent. But maybe I've misunderstood what urgent really means." Samira was already back in her seat by then, notebook hugged to her chest. Clarabelle held her close, kissed the top of her head without saying a word. Elon looked back at the mic. "We can 3D print houses, we can land rockets, but we still can't guarantee a child won't go to bed hungry. That's embarrassing. That's failure." No one clapped. It wasn't the kind of moment that called for applause. He pulled the mic from the stand and walked toward the edge of the stage. "I've talked a lot about Mars," he continued, "about making life multiplanetary. But maybe we need to prove we can take care of one planet first. One neighborhood, one kid." It wasn't a press-ready statement. It wasn't polished, but for the first time that day, people weren't looking at Elon Musk, the inventor or the billionaire. They were seeing Elon, the person. He gave a small nod, set the mic down, and walked off stage without another word. What happened next wasn't planned either. As he stepped behind the curtain, one of his assistants asked, "Should we prepare a statement?" He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "There's nothing I can say that fixes what she said." He canceled the next panel, told his team to give his seat to another speaker. Then he sat in a side room with the door shut, Watching the clip someone had already uploaded online. It was already spreading. He watched it once, then again. By the third time, he paused on Samira's face, the intensity in her eyes, the courage it took to ask something so simple, so enormous, without blinking. She reminded him of someone. He thought of his own kids, of a time years back when one of them asked at dinner, "Why don't we help more?" He hadn't known what to say then either. Later that night, as the event buzzed with speculation and hot takes, Elon quietly made a call, not to a PR firm, not to a political donor, to an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade, a woman who used to run a mobile food kitchen in Southern California. Her voice answered on the second ring. "Is this about that little girl?" He paused. "You saw it?" "Everyone saw it, Elon. I need to talk to you," and he said, "about doing something real. Not flashy, just real." But outside that side room, the world was already watching, and they weren't waiting for Elon's next move. They were already choosing sides. By the time Elon left the convention center that evening, the clip had been viewed over 3 million times. It spread faster than wildfire, shared across Facebook, reposted on Instagram stories, clipped and reclipped on TikTok with hashtags like #Why Not Luis and #Elon Was Asked. But it wasn't just the speed that caught people off guard. It was the way people reacted. Some praised Samira's bravery. They called her the little girl with the world's most important question. Teachers, nurses, single parents all chimed in, saying her voice echoed the one they'd buried under bills and long hours and broken systems. One woman from Tucson posted a tearful video saying, "That child said what I've wanted to scream for years, but didn't think anyone would listen to." But others didn't take it so kindly. Tech bros online accused her of being used by her mother for attention. One podcast host, smug behind his mic, asked, "Why's a kid like that even at a tech summit?" A few more cynical voices said it was a plant, a PR stunt, that the tears were staged, that the whole thing was a setup. Clarabelle saw the comments, the memes, the arguments, but she turned the phone off and focused on folding laundry and warming Luis's next meal. She told Samira not to read anything. "They don't know us," she said. "They didn't hear your voice in the kitchen all those nights." What surprised everyone, even Elon's own team, was that he didn't rush to explain. No blog post, no apology, no spin. He stayed off Twitter, didn't grant interviews, and that silence made people talk even more. In Pittsburgh, a group of high schoolers started a fundraiser under Samira's name to help feed kids with dietary restrictions. In Fresno, a retired mechanic used his last paycheck to buy 10 bags of groceries and drop them off at a local school. "If a girl can ask that much, I can do this much," he wrote in Sharpie on the bags. At a council meeting in Cincinnati, a city rep held up a screenshot of Samira on stage and said, "We're spending $30 million on a parking garage while kids in our district go to sleep hungry. Anyone else see a problem here?" News networks scrambled to reach Clarabelle. Local reporters camped outside their apartment building. One offered cash just for an exclusive. She declined them all. She wasn't interested in attention. She just wanted to make sure Luis took his meds on time. Samira went back to school. Her teacher, Mr. Fortner, cleared the last 10 minutes of class that week so students could write letters to someone in the world they thought needed to hear something true. But it wasn't all support. At recess, one boy told her his dad said she shouldn't have blamed the rich guy. She didn't respond. She just sat quietly under the shade of the big elm tree and opened her notebook. Inside, she started writing a new story. This one wasn't about jellyfish skies or banana ships. It was about a girl who asked a question so big, even people who didn't want to listen had to. That same day, in a podcast studio in Santa Clara, Elon sat across from a host who asked him gently, "Has that moment changed anything for you?" Elon didn't pause this time. "Yes," he said simply. "I used to think solving hunger was someone else's job. Now I think maybe it's everyone's." The host leaned in. "So what are you going to do?" Elon scratched his chin, then gave a crooked smile. "Still figuring that out, but I know I want to start by shutting up and listening better. That little girl gave me a blueprint. I just need to stop pretending I already know the answers." But while Elon talked about learning, Samira's story wasn't finished. Not yet. There was one more voice the world hadn't heard from. Elon wasn't used to doubt creeping in like that. He was the guy people expected answers from, the man who could break down the physics of reusable rockets in his sleep. But Samira's question didn't need solving, it needed reckoning. He stayed mostly quiet for the next few days, showing up where he had to, declining events he didn't. His usual urgency had been replaced with something else, stillness. And for someone like Elon, stillness was uncomfortable. One night, holed up in a small Airbnb outside Flagstaff, Arizona, away from his usual noise, he scrolled through messages on a private email account he rarely used. Among the marketing spam and fan mail, one message stopped him. Subject line, "You don't know me, but I knew you once." It was from someone named Wyatt Green. Elon leaned back, the name familiar but buried. He clicked. The message was short, barely a few sentences. "We met in South Africa. You probably don't remember, but we shared a room at a math camp. I was the kid who always forgot his lunch. You used to sneak me apples from your bag. I watched the video of that girl. Just wanted you to know, I still remember those apples. You helped someone once. You can again." Elon stared at the screen. It was true, he'd almost forgotten. The memory came back in bits, the cold school dorms, the sharp smell of chalk. Wyatt's nervous laugh. That had been over 3 decades ago. They were just kids. But hunger even then had a way of showing up where you least expected it. That night, he pulled out a notebook, something he hadn't done in years. No iPad, no digital whiteboard, just ink and paper. He started jotting ideas, not about new satellites or AI chipsets. He wrote, food delivery without profit, nutrition before logistics, respect, not rescue. In the days that followed, he called people who weren't in tech, activists, organizers, school counselors. He listened more than he spoke. He asked about what worked and what didn't. He wanted the stories behind the systems. He wasn't interested in flashy donations or one-time PR stunts. He wanted something that could stay standing, even when the cameras turned off. And in that time, he recorded one video. Not for the press, not for investors, for Samira. It was never posted. He sent it directly to her mom, with no instruction, no fanfare. In the short clip, Elon looked tired, more human than usual. He sat at a desk, hands clasped, and said, "Samira, I've spent most of my life trying to build things people said were impossible. But I didn't build them alone. I had help. I had chances. And I forgot that not everyone gets those. I heard your question, and I'm working on my answer. It might take time, but I promise it won't be words. It'll be something you can point to and say, that's because I spoke." Clarabelle watched it first, alone, while Samira slept. Her hands trembled slightly as she hit play again, this time with Luis curled beside her. The next morning, Samira didn't say anything after watching it. She just nodded slowly and wrote 2 new lines in her notebook. "The sky people heard me, not because I shouted, but because I asked." But what Elon didn't expect was that someone else, someone very close to Samira, was about to step into the conversation with a message that would take everything even further. Luis had always been the quieter one, not because he didn't have things to say, but because sickness made talking feel like swimming upstream. He often let his sister speak for both of them, and she did, fiercely, with pride. But one afternoon, while Samira was busy rereading her stories and their mom was folding laundry with her back turned, Luis asked softly, "Can I write him something too?" Clarabelle turned around surprised. "Write who, mi amor?" "Elon," he said. "I think he should know I heard him." It took him 2 days. Writing was hard on his joints. His fingers ached, his grip weak. But he insisted on doing it himself. Samira offered to help, but he shook his head. "You already did your part. This one's mine." The letter wasn't long, but every word felt deliberate. "Dear Mr. Elon, my name is Luis. I'm Samira's little brother. I'm the one she was talking about. I saw your video. Thank you for talking to her like a person. Some adults don't. She's very brave, but sometimes she cries in her room when she thinks we're asleep. I wanted to tell you that I'm not mad at you. I know you're trying to do a lot. I just think people forget about kids like me sometimes. We can't eat normal stuff. We get tired faster. But we still want to grow up. I want to be a scientist, maybe like you. But first, I want to feel strong. It's hard when your tummy always hurts. I don't want to be famous. I just want my mom to not be so tired. And for my sister to write more books. She's really good. If you ever want to read one, I think you'd like the one with the invisible bridge. She made that one for me. Thank you for listening. Even if nothing changes, it meant something to us. Your friend, Luis Navarro Clarabelle, scanned the letter and sent it to the same email that had delivered Elon's video. She didn't expect a response. She didn't even tell the kids she sent it. But a week later, a small package arrived at their door. No logo, no flashy wrapping. Just a plain cardboard box with their raw address scribbled in handwriting that clearly belonged to someone in a hurry. Inside were two things. One was a hardcover journal, stitched leather, thick paper, titled For Samira's Stories. Inside the front cover, a handwritten note. Keep writing, the world needs your voice. E. The second item was smaller, more discreet. A card with a phone number, a short message, and a contact for someone at a foundation Elon had helped launch just days earlier. A pilot program focused on delivering medically tailored meals to low-income families with children who had chronic illnesses. The first delivery came that Friday. Fresh greens, high-protein foods, specialty items they'd only seen in magazines. No questions asked, no cameras, just a knock, a smile, and a bag that weighed more than hope. It weighed like relief. Luis took a bite of salmon that night and whispered, "It doesn't hurt." Samira looked at him wide-eyed and scribbled something quickly in her notebook. Clarabelle didn't cry right away. She waited until the kids were asleep. Then she sat in the kitchen under the buzz of a single light bulb and let the tears come quietly. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was failing them. But the final lesson in all of this wouldn't come from Elon or the internet or even the media. It would come from something simpler. What happens when one voice gets heard and the rest of us decide to stop pretending it wasn't speaking all along? It started with a question, sure. But what stayed with people wasn't the question itself. It was the way a child made the world pause. For weeks, conversations kept happening in places they rarely did. In grocery store lines, at school board meetings, in break rooms across the country where someone would suddenly say, "You saw that girl, right?" And even if no one answered, everyone knew which girl they meant. In Omaha, a 7th grade class started a weekly project called Hard Questions, where students wrote down one thing they wished an adult would answer. One note read, "Why do we only care about kids when they're missing?" Another, "Why is clean water something you have to fight for?" In Phoenix, a nonprofit that had never gotten more than 200 views on any video suddenly had 1.7 million. Why? Because they were tagged in a post titled, "This is what Samira was talking about." And in Bakersfield, Samira's teacher added a new rule. No raising hands required during story time. Some voices, he said, don't wait for permission. Elon never posted about the foundation again. He never linked it to his companies. But quietly, new hubs opened. Newark, Sacramento, Tulsa, focused not on feeding the masses, but feeding the ones who'd been skipped. None of this fixed the world overnight, not even close. But it changed the way people looked at the word responsibility. It wasn't just about what you could build or how much you could give. It was about how well you listened when someone smaller than you was brave enough to speak. Samira, for her part, didn't want more attention. She kept writing. At night, after brushing Luis's hair or helping fold clothes, she'd fill page after page with stories that stretched farther than their apartment walls. She finished her book that winter. She titled it, Things That Shouldn't Be Heavy, But Are. And in the first few pages, she wrote a dedication. To everyone who didn't look away when it got uncomfortable. And to my brother who made hunger look like it had manners, until we told it to leave. One night, during a quiet dinner, Clarabelle turned to her daughter and asked, "Why do you think he listened to you?" Samira thought for a second, then shrugged. "Maybe because I didn't ask him to be a hero, I just asked him to look." Luis smiled at that, a forkful of spinach halfway to his mouth. And maybe that was the real answer. Maybe changing the world doesn't start with power, or money, or invention. Maybe it starts with looking, really looking, and not blinking when what you see isn't pretty. Because sometimes one honest voice, small as it may be, doesn't just break the silence. It becomes the thing people carry with them, long after the headlines fade. And in a world full of noise, that kind of voice, it's not loud, it's clear. If this story moved you, let it be more than just a moment. Share it, talk about it, act on it. And if someone smaller, younger, or quieter than you speaks, listen, because they might just be asking the question we've all been avoiding.